I'd like to ask you, building on the remarks of your fellow panelists, how the nature of persecution of people seeking their civil and political rights in Bahrain has changed since 2011, and how have you changed over the course of the last decade or so? And additionally, what would your analysis be of the current state of freedom of expression in Bahrain, or lack thereof?
Thank you, Alex, and thanks to Salam and to the other panelists. Between 2011 and now, there's been, I would say, just one significant change in the patterns of persecution or the patterns of, which is that there's been a decline in the number of allegations of torture. So that is a change for the better. In 2011 and the years right after, there was a major spike in torture as the government clamped down brutally on the protests that year. But within the past, I would say roughly 4 years, all the indications I've received are that torture has declined. I would point in this regard to an instance in February 2021 when the Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, who's also the Prime Minister, gave an interview to all the controlled local news outlets in Bahrain. And in the interview, he stressed, and I'm quoting here from the text of the interview given by the local paper Al Ayam, quote, the importance of starting to move past the method of relying on confessions in court and relying instead on decisive material evidence. My reading of this is that the Crown Prince was referring pretty obviously, albeit not explicitly, to the use of torture and confessions extracted through torture, and was announcing that there's been a government decision to move away from it as a common practice and policy. In the natural course of things, it would be pretty odd for most people to confess against themselves if it meant going to prison, and it would be even more odd if a legal system were getting all these amazing confessions out of hardened criminals. So the constant reliance up until about 2017, 2018 in Bahrain's court system and in the most high profile political cases on confessions, quote unquote, confessions as a key element of evidence was on its face extremely problematic and suspicious. And, historically, if you look at the use of confession, quote unquote, as a primary form of criminal evidence, it has tended to be linked closely to the use of torture or at least maltreatment as the main tool for making a criminal case. So I think that around the years 2018 to 2012, or excuse me, 2018 to 2020, the Bahraini government decided that they would move away from torture as a regular tool of repression, and that the Crown Prince's interview was the public announcement of this shift. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen anymore. There was an instance of maltreatment just last year that was publicly documented at the time of the mass prison hunger strike. It also doesn't mean that it can't be brought back as a regular policy or wouldn't be brought back if the government felt that its hold on power was threatened. But for now, there's been a decline in that regard. Other than that, though, the nature of persecution, I don't think has really changed from 2011 until now. The government's principal tools are the standard ones, arbitrary detention, prosecution for opposition, speech, or protest, and imprisonment. And the main legacy of repression from 2011 that is still visible and is still affecting Bahraini politics today is the ongoing imprisonment of 11 key political leaders of those protests. Originally, they were 14, but over time, the number has changed. Some were released, another one went in. So rather than trying to refer to this group by number, I think it makes more sense to refer to this group by the local term that's commonly used, which is Ramuz, which means basically just like the leaders or the leading figures. So, yeah, as of today, the Ramuz group are 11 key political leaders. 10 of them have been in prison from 2011, and out of those, seven have life sentences. And so there's just no expectation that they will be released at all ever unless political conditions change. Along with those 10 from 2011 directly, we should also count Sheikh Ali Salman among this group, the Ramuz. Ali Salman was not taken into prison until 2015, but his case is very much linked with the events of 2011. And it's also very illustrative of how Bahrain chose the path of repression from 2011 onwards. So I'll focus on that case specifically for a couple moments here. Ali Salman was and is the leader of Al Wifaq, which is the major opposition party in Bahrain. To this day, it's still the single most successful political party in Bahrain under the current constitution, meaning it's won the highest number of seats in the Bahraini parliament of any participating party in any election held under the current constitution when it was participating in elections. And the major debate within the Bahraini opposition has always been whether to try and use the government's political channels to seek change or to boycott official institutions completely. When there was some liberalization in Bahrain in the first decade of this millennium, before 2011, Al Wifaq chose to try the path of participation in the existing system, including in elections. So they chose to play the political game according to the rules that the government sets and try to get change, positive change that way. And this cost them. In fact, it fractured their movement, and the more radical faction within Al Wifaq broke away into its own movement, Haq, which held to the line of boycotting government institutions and elections. So Al Wifaq, led by Ali Salman, this prisoner, paid a real social and political cost for making this choice to try and work for change within the system. And yet, after 2011, in which they were active in the mass protests, Al Wifaq and Ali Salman, after 2011, and particularly in the period 2015 to 2017, the Bahraini government, in effect, finalized its post-2011 crackdown, or put the finishing touches on it, by outlawing Al Wifaq as a party and by imprisoning Ali Salman for life. So that was a choice for repression, clearly, and it's one that unfortunately is still in effect today and will probably continue to damage Bahraini politics and society for another generation, at least. To the second question, or the second part of your question about status of freedom of expression today, the biggest political development in Bahrain within the past year has been the emergence of protests, first in solidarity with Gaza and Palestine, and then more recently against the government's joining the US's naval actions against the Houthis in Yemen. And this has included protests in the capital, Manama, which used to be a red line for the government. So what's interesting to me and what I would note in this regard is that Bahrain still hasn't revoked the law that outright bans all unapproved peaceful assemblies in the capital that was passed as Decree of Act number 22 of 2013, and it's still there. So if the government and the authorities are allowing protests to happen in Manama today without dispersing them, that's a political decision and not a legal change. And this indicates that the government continues to view rights as a matter to be determined according to its political convenience rather than as a fundamental legal principle. So yeah, those are my remarks on what's changed and what's stayed the same over the past decade, or more than a decade, 13 years now.